athletes turned therapists. Our focus in these episodes is to humanize the athlete experience beyond the lines of their arena. In this podcast, we will explore the whole athlete, highlighting the mental, emotional, and social aspects of their journey. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Meister, and I am here with Sasa, who is a therapist at our practice. Sasa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, just officially joined the team. Was an intern for the past year working with the athlete wellness division, and happy for my first podcast officially as a therapist with Millennium.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yes. And this is the Athlete Wellness Podcast with Millennium Counseling Center. And today, specifically, we're going to be talking about taking any kind of mental health break or any kind of mental health leave of absence when it comes to, your sport, athletics, you name it. And just kind of I feel like the implications that come with just, I don't know, burnout, especially as an athlete, like when you're burnt out and you really just need a break, you know? I don't know. So, have you ever experienced anything like that or had experiences with, something similar to that?
Yeah, I think definitely towards the end of my sports career, I guess you can put it, playing sports, definitely being burned out, definitely a little bit loss of love for the sport, and also kind of just dealing with injury altogether and kind of recognizing needing the break from the sport. And I think altogether, a mental health break can be so different from each athlete and what it all kind of entails of how to go about taking the first step for that. What does the break kind of entail? What does it mean for them in that? And then what does it mean for returning if that's something that they have in mind, and kind of everything in between.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like this is something that I've seen with clients, personally. I mean, I've experienced this personally as well, hitting that point of burnout in your athletic career. But I've also seen this with a bunch of clients too, a bunch of athletes. And I know it's common, especially in the professional world as well. I know we chatted a little bit. I know you have some specific examples also of this. I always think of Simone Biles,
Mhm.
specifically, and how like she needed a break. She needed time away from sport so she could just take care of herself. There's a lot that people don't see when it comes to how much, your mental health can, because it's an invisible thing, right? Like it really is the invisible piece of it, but how much time you need to just kind of reset your energy and all of it and take care of yourself. And I think a lot of people will find too, when you do that, then you find the love for the sport again, but you just need space from it sometimes. So just like you need space from the thing, or you just need to slow down. It doesn't mean it's gone forever. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to find that love, that passion, or even that motivation again. It just means that you need a break.
Yeah.
You need a break. And I feel like we need to normalize that more in our culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your example of with Simone Biles, think everyone on the outside kind of noticed it or thought of it as a performance thing. Like she's not performing, or she feels like she's not performing at this certain level, right? But I think there goes to so much underneath just performance, because I feel like when it comes to athletes and mental health in general, people just think of the performance side of things when it can be a million things outside of that. It can be things outside of their athletic identity alongside of that, just general anxiety, off the court, off the field, whatever it may be, depression alongside that, life transitions, and, kind of what you were saying too with that loss of motivation in how the identity outside of being an athlete impacts their athletic identity just as much too.
100%. You're so spot on there. I feel like that's just a huge piece of this too. Even I've talked about this, there's an over identification sometimes, I think, with athletics as well, where we over identify with the one thing. And I always say this, it doesn't mean I still consider myself an athlete. I am very retired from sport, but I still consider myself an athlete. But I think for a lot of people, especially if you're on such a pedestal or a stage like that, that's what you're known for. That is your identity, but you have so many different parts of you, and your values go beyond just a sport itself. And so I think, yes, a huge piece of this too is looking at the whole person, not just the athlete,
Yeah.
you know? And when you look at a whole person, you see that they need support. There's other stuff going on, especially when it comes to their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like it's a good example of it. But yeah, go ahead, Sasa.
I was just gonna say with, whether your personal experience or even what you've noticed within your work of like, what do you think is like the main blocker that you've noticed for people to or athletes to notice that they need that break and taking a step into it if that's their decision of going along with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's such a hard one too, because, I never, especially as a therapist, like it's not my job to tell people take, and I think that's what's really different about Millennium and us specifically, having been like former athletes, like understanding it. I'm not here to be like, I want everybody to take breaks and like
Mhm.
learn how to slow down within that space, within the culture itself. But this requires a massive cultural change within athletics as well. So that's like, there's so many layers to this. But obviously, I want the client or the athlete to discern for themselves too if that is the best decision. Like if that's really what they need. So I think a big piece of this too is accessing their needs, and sometimes it's just a day. Like sometimes all they need is a day. Sometimes they need a week. Sometimes it's figuring out how to incorporate more mental health breaks, pauses, slowing down, self-care, you name it, like literally self-care into their day-to-day as an athlete. But there are definitely certain cases where burnout is so strong. Like the burnout, you hit that point where you've almost, you've overtrained or you've done so much that you don't feel, and this is what I use this word a lot. One of my clients would laugh if she heard this, but I've used this word a lot, and I call it alignment. Like when you no longer feel like when you feel really misaligned or out of alignment, I feel like that's a huge, like, tall tale sign. When passion is gone, you're not finding purpose in it anymore. The drive and the motivation isn't there even, and you're still doing all the things. That's where I'm like, there you probably need to pause. We probably need to pause and kind of figure out, like, what's necessary or needed for you at that time. But I definitely think sometimes you need a month. Sometimes you need
Mhm.
a year to really understand what's going on too, because it's not just like there's so much band-aiding in this world as well, or you just like band-aid the problem with it's like a quick fix. And I'm like, no, like there's deeper healing that needs to occur before you can re-enter that space. And when you re-enter that, you're so much more realigned to like what it is that to your why as well, like why you played the sport in the first place, like creating more joy from the sport instead of it being this like dread and something that you feel like you have to do, and turning that more into a want to do because you want to compete, because you're finding the love for it again or falling back in love with it. I feel like the loss of love and passion is a huge one
Yeah.
that I see.
Yeah, I think due
Yeah.
to like
That was very long-winded.
no, no, I appreciate it of just like hearing out like all the different kind of pathways that like kind of came to mind of like when it comes to that. And I think, a big part too that it's like it's the athlete's decision of like what the break kind of like means to them and what a break actually is. And I think too of like, we don't want to get to this point of like it's absolute burnout, it's absolute overtraining where it's like you have to cut it off immediately, where we can be proactive and like take these little breaks for ourselves where it's not like I'm completely not doing my sport, but like it can get to that point if we're not proactive with it. And I think it's something really self-awareness comes a lot of like with the athlete of noticing these little things that might be affecting them that are adding up like you were saying like with the alignment too of like their loss of love for it, the purpose behind it, or even like noticing things that aren't even maybe sports related that are changing within them, like these big shifts with, you know, sleep and eating and just things along those lines of like general mental health stuff that are getting taken outside of sport and noticing that within themselves too.
100%. And that's the thing. That was the biggest thing we were talking about. I was like, these people, they're the athletes, they have lives outside of it too. You know, like they're still human having a human experience. And I think sometimes it's easy to put people up again on a pedestal and think that they're like these superhumans, right? They might be doing superhuman things, but they're not exempt from the human experience and having human emotions and just experiencing different things in life, such as grief, you know, even any the conundrum of things, whether that's external and they're dealing with things outside of it, or really internal, like depression, like anxiety, like any type of mental health diagnoses, or just like basic, like just struggling with your mental health. But that was, you brought up a really good point that I was like, ooh, yes, I kind of want to talk about more, is like the difference between being like proactive and reactive as well. That's a good point, because I think a lot of athletes, especially, I mean, I was this way. Like you you like keep going until you hit your wall, and then when you hit your wall, it's like crisis.
Yeah.
It feels like a crisis, like a mental health crisis, and that's when you hit that. You totally hit that burnout, and I'm like, "Dang, had I had more, you know, just like things in place for myself at the time, it probably would have, it would have saved me from hitting that point of burnout, you know, at peaks and points. And there are times where I still, you still push through it. You still push through it, but definitely like even just incorporating more like self-care activities and day-to-day things, even like meditation. Like now I meditate all the time, and it's just been such a game changer, and I'm like, that is now part of my routine. And I know a lot of athletes do that, but I know there's a ton who don't as well. I was super resistant to it when I was in college. So yeah, but it's just something I was just something I was thinking about as well, because I like that.
Yeah.
I think that you brought that up.
It's like a little bit of like just the mentality that we learn being athletes of like you keep pushing. And, when that might be, related to like some sort of routine or some sort of, what's the word for it? Like skill that you're trying to put into practice, like actually like in practice. That doesn't mean you have to take that mentality with your own mental health or like other things outside of sport of like you just keep pushing. But like if you keep pushing at some point it's gonna break. And kind of implementing those little things to not get to that point, I think is super important. And also just like, you know, not even getting to the point of like just noticing that like coaches or like your teammates noticing like your performance is off or is different. It's like even just noticing them, maybe some more isolation or just like not themselves in a way, and like noticing that aspect within your teammate or your athlete as a coach and stuff like that too.
Yeah, 100. I was 100%. I know it's hard too for coaches to discern that, especially when they have these a huge roster or a huge team. I think of like soccer, right? That's a huge football, even huge rosters. And so I know it's hard to discern that, but I always say this for coaches too, like just keeping an open, I mean, if you're a coach watching this, but like just keeping an open mind or like kind of mental blackboarding that as well. Because yeah, that when you see more of that emotional withdrawal from a player, that's usually a sign that something beyond what's happening on, on the field, court, whatever, there's likely something else going on there,
Yeah.
and definitely checking in on that too.
Yeah. I'm curious with maybe with like your background of, working with athletes in general of like, what anxieties do you feel like you notice the most within athletes when it comes to that brick wall that they're kind of getting to of like burnout or overtraining and stuff like that? What anxieties kind of pop up? there that you notice frequently?
Mhm. I'm like over here, I'm like, "Mhm, that's my therapy face." I feel like there's just a conundrum. I feel like the list could go on and on there. I think there's just a lot of fear in also speaking up as well. Like, just speaking up, telling a coach that, and because there's a lot of unknown in that space, right? They don't know what their life is gonna look like or what it means for honestly, or what it means for them to take a break. Because you don't know until you know, and you don't know until you move through that period, right? And you also don't and that's another thing. I think there's such a fear around not not knowing the response or the reaction you'll get from peers, teammates, coaches, specifically systems, right? Like, you can look at this, just you could start at the high school level, you could look at this at the club level, you could look at this at the collegiate level, and then, professional and so on. And even then, if you're talking about professional athletes too, I think there's beyond that, like the socio kind of almost like structure of how sociological structure in a way of how fans perceive it too, or people that follow them, people that admire them. And I think there is this feeling like, am I making a mistake? And my thing is, if you are taking care of yourself and you are accessing what it is that you truly need, it will never be a mistake. And and it's not a mistake. Like, it's because you need to take like, you genuinely need to take care of yourself. But I definitely think so much of that fear is rooted in how people will perceive you in a way.
Mhm.
I think perception, but then also that feeling of like, am I a failure? I know that comes up. Like, am I failing myself? Am I failing society? Am I failing my family? Whatever comes up from that, and which is a lot of the work then you're doing with, the athlete or the client too. And it's like, no, like, you're not actually failing yourself. You're accessing what you need. You're supporting yourself. And I think that's sometimes the first time they even, they're recognizing that too. But it's really hard because growth and change is uncomfortable. There's so much discomfort in that space of making that decision, and then there's even more discomfort once you make the decision. Sometimes it's that immediate relief. Other times you're moving through it and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is hard for me. This is hard for me to have made that decision, and now I'm in the decision." And I'm sitting with the time and the break, even though I know it's needed. I'm like, exactly, but it's needed. So I think just be really gentle with yourself. Give yourself a lot of grace through that too, if you do take a break, or if you need a break, or if you go to somebody and you're like, I have to take this, being like really, really kind to yourself through that, because there's a lot of fluctuating emotions that come with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way that you put it, like, you making that decision of, like, taking time for yourself, or, like, acknowledging that you need that support of yourself, of, like, maybe it is a little break, maybe, whatever the break looks like to the athlete themselves, like, it's never a mistake in that way of, like, taking that step. And like you said, it's gonna be maybe some discomfort or some fear, anxieties, saying it out loud and doing it, and then it comes along with maybe some discomfort and, like, those lot of what if questions that come along with that, being in the decision alongside of that, of, like, what does the break look like? Like, are you giving yourself a certain amount of time? What are you gonna do within that break? What are the main focuses of that break? Whether, maybe it's coming from injury, maybe it's coming from burnout, or, just general mental health of anxiety, depression, whatever it may be. And kind of having the focus of the break being something more than just, like, nothing, and because athletes don't do well with nothing, and kind of having,
Eh,
like, some sort of focus for it, so that when it is time and you are ready to go back, that you are more equipped to kinda handle everything that comes along with another transition on top of that.
Oh my gosh, totally. I love that you said that too, and all the what ifs are so real. They're so real, because but they're not. It's like, but they're not real. Where I'm like, the what ifs aren't real, but it feels real. The what ifs come up all the time, and that's something I feel like a lot of the work we do is even like debunking that in a lot of ways, like debunking the myths, right? Because all you have is, is the present moment, and that's you just truly just like taking your care of yourself and putting yourself first. I know, Sasa, you had mentioned that you have like a specific example of someone who had left, and I've seen this too, but like someone who leaves sport or temporarily mental health leave of absence, right? Or just takes a break and then comes back.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me more about
Yeah.
that.
There was a British cyclist named Leo Hayter, and if I'm pronouncing the last name wrong, I'm sorry, but he took a break last year and he came back and he pretty much, lots of things have shifted and changed for him just in his life of like, whether it was like taking a break completely off of training and then slowly implementing training back within the last few months and coming back and like, not 100% in the same way that he was before, like competitively, but feeling so much better who he is and his identity with being a cyclist. And he even mentioned like kind of attributing a lot of his therapy and lots of phone calls and taking that time to where he's at now, not just as an athlete, but as himself, or even like just the shifts of there was like a comment or quote of like he's 15 pounds or something heavier, but he's better than ever as a cyclist. And of course, when it comes to cyclists too, like, some of like the body image things or like just body composition can play a big mental factor in how you perform. But he's, attributes a whole year of a mental break from sport or from cycling to where he's at now, pretty much of just kind of big shout out to therapy in general of helping him get to the point where he's at.
Big shout out to us. No, I'm just kidding. I love that. No, that's such a great example of it. And it's like it's just so amazing too to see how many professional athletes, college athletes, even former pros too, retired athletes, like just how much people are advocating and talking about mental health in general for athletes, but also their own experiences with mental health. I feel like it's so profound because I know so many people, like so many athletes struggle. Like we all struggle in our own way. And so even when we're thriving, like it's cyclical too. So it's just like I think that normalizes so much as well, that story specifically, because he didn't leave it forever. He just took a break from it, and then it sounds like he found himself. It sounds like he did a lot of inner work. It sounds like he healed. And I mean, healing, it's never ending, but it sounds like he really did the work for himself and also just taking that time and space away from something. So again, you kind of like you come in, it's like that fresh set of eyes. Like you're seeing it, you see it differently. And that's what's so cool about sport in general. It's like it doesn't have to leave you. Sometimes we just need a little, like there's power in the pause. We need a little reset, recalibration, reprogramming so we can enter that space with just like newness and like renewal almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, the mental break, it wasn't just to get back to performing better either. And I think that's the largest part of the story of his, mental health break from being an athlete is that, like you said, he pretty much found himself in a deeper way of past being a cyclist and just like enjoyment of the sport and enjoyment of who he is and his life in general too. And I think, that's probably like the largest, concept that I took out of kind of reading that story and about, what his last year kind of looks like too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that, Sasa. That was a great example to bring up. And I know we're about out of time. Sasa, do you have any like other final thoughts or anything, that could be helpful for anyone that's considering this or just going through any kind of, mental health, just anything with their mental health or just struggling with their mental health?
I think you put it in like the best way. Like the quote of the whole pod today is that it's no mistake. It may be some discomfort up front or like, pushing past the stigma behind it. But at the end of the day, saying out loud that you need a break or advocating for yourself in that way. There might be some discomfort up front, but it's never a mistake. And at the end of the day, it's what's supporting you the most is yourself and taking that step. And I think that's the quote of the pod from you today, I think.
No, stop, Sasa. Oh my gosh. It's so funny when therapists get on, I'm like, Sasa, that was so beautiful, amazing. And you're like, Sarah, that was the quote. Well, okay. Thank you to everybody for listening today. And Sasa, thank you so much for coming on. I hope this was helpful for those listening and hearing. And again, I always say this, just don't be afraid to ask for help. It's literally the strongest thing you can do. I understand the fear around it, but truly, it is the strongest thing you can do. And accessing yourself and your needs, like your needs come first. What you need and your mental health does too. So, all right, thank you. And until next time.